Okay, everybody, why don't we take seats? We can move on to our next presentation. And we're going to be learning about how to respond to a data breach. I'm going to introduce our panelists. Meg Bronneck from Coverys. Meg joined Coverys in March 2012 and has served in the role of Compliance Manager and Privacy Officer since 2013, where she has been primarily responsible for the ongoing development of the company's compliance program and also for the oversight of the organization's compliance with HIPAA. Her role in compliance has evolved to include management of the company's internal audit function, oversight of the enterprise risk management program, and also intake, investigation, and resolution of the company's privacy issues and practices. And her current role as Director of Compliance and Privacy. Her responsibilities include oversight of the company's information governance program, as well as the claims regulatory reporting unit. Our next panelist is Cameron Shilling. He's a director at McLane, Middleton. He founded the firm's privacy and data security group, and in his 20-plus years as an attorney, he has managed, litigated, and resolved numerous data security, technology, and complex litigation matters throughout New England and around the country. His depth and breadth of experience in data security includes managing risk assessments and audits, preparing and implementing written data security policies, training executives, managers, and employees, addressing day-to-day security issues, and investigating and remediating data breaches. And our third panelist is David Sun, who is Chief Executive Officer of SunBlock Systems and an accomplished technologist and cyber investigator. For the past 20 years, David has delivered expert services to clients involving data and system security, cyber forensics response, and post-breach remediation. He's a practical problem solver and technologist who is able to describe technology-related issues in understandable terms to attorneys, judges, and juries. He has served as an expert on numerous high-profile bet-the-company matters and has testified in various courts. I turn you over to your panelists.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan, for the introduction, and thank you all for having us here today. I think Cam and David and I are very happy to be here talking with you about data breach response. So with that, I'll just echo what Susan said. So I'm the Director of Compliance and Privacy with Coverys. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the name, we're a national medical malpractice insurer and also do medical provider education. So in our wheelhouse is a tremendous amount of sensitive, regulated information. And so, as you may or may not know, October was the National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So we're November 1, right? So we're gonna just ride the wave of momentum for our cybersecurity awareness. And I think as part of that, and I'm sure you all are inundated as I am with all kinds of promotional materials and whatnot to kind of sell you or grab your attention on various cybersecurity programs and enhancements. And so with that, I saw a statistic just last week that really resonated with me, probably scared me more than anything, but it said 73 records per second are compromised in the US, right? So 73 records per second. It's just almost unimaginable. And I'm sure I've got some colleagues in the audience who are picking that statistic apart right now, but it is what it is, and I think that type of statistic really serves my role to a certain extent, because for the education and training that I'm required to do and the sensitive information that we have in place at Coverys, you see just how inevitable kind of an event, an incident, or a breach is. It is inevitable. Things happen on a daily basis, and we need to prepare for what we can do to limit the repercussions of an event. So, you know, if I had been here 2 or 3 years ago, I would probably be talking with you primarily about HIPAA, about the mass regulation for consumer protection of data, but I'm not. Actually, we're going to talk to you very generally, I think, with the implementations of GDPR and of New York cyber requirements for financial services institutions, as well as California coming down the pike, and even Australia's notified data breach scheme. I think you see an entirely new landscape that is, it's US state, it's federal, but it's also international, global, depending on your business. So it's just a changing, evolving, growing industry that we have to look at. So with that in mind, Cam and David and I kind of set out to give you some practical, I think, how-to guides for responding and preventing these types of events. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to roll through this, and obviously happy to take questions as they come up. So for our first slide, so the outline of the presentation will be, we're going to cover some basic information security principles. We're going to talk about responding to incidents and breaches. And then we're going to look at some preventative measures, both in the form of risk assessment and mitigation. And then lastly, we'll conclude with kind of 10 key steps to reducing security risks. So for the basic security principles, information security principles, this is a great 5-part reminder. So you're preparing for incidents and breaches through risk management and for preventative measures. You're developing an incident response policy and plan that you will follow. You're responding to circumstances of incident or breach, recovering data, remediating as necessary, and then reassessing and really committing to certain security enhancements if necessary. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cam.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, good, I'm glad you're awake. We love questions, and this is a presentation that's conducive to questions, stories, concerns, so please don't hesitate, ask us your questions. So I'm a data security lawyer. We're kind of a bit of a rare breed, but this is the type of stuff we do. And what we're gonna try to, we're not gonna talk to you about law today. We're gonna talk to you about how you do things on the ground. That's why you got lawyers here, that's why you got technologists. We're gonna tell you how to do this in 2 different ways. One is we're gonna talk to you about how to respond to a breach, and the other is we're gonna talk to you about how to prevent a breach, because we'd be really poor professionals if we just talked to you about how to respond and not how to avoid in the first instance. But today's a crisis management conference, so we're gonna start off with talking about how you respond to a breach. So if you haven't figured it out already, if you don't have an incident response plan, you should. So, and don't worry, because there's lots of companies that put this off until the end. In fact, this is one of the biggest things that when we do risk assessments and do preventative measures, we're always shoving the other plan off. We're gonna do a written data security plan under mass law or under HIPAA. We might have a disaster recovery plan, and yes, we're gonna get around to that incident response plan. And if you don't have one or haven't gotten around to that in your risk management, that's something you really need to do. I'm a big proponent of incident response by bullet point, because when you're in a crisis, you don't need prose. You need to know what to do now. And kind of, the materials are kind of a 20-point bullet point outline a bit of what an incident response plan might look like. Now, what I will also say is we're going to go through these 20 points, but this is never the same. I mean, whenever you do a crisis, we slot 7 into 3, 5 into 18. You always got to play around because every incident response is different. And you gotta go a little bit by feel. This is much more of an art form than it is a science, so I'm sure the 3 of us up here as we go through this are gonna give you that sense. So number 1 is, if you got a plan, you need to follow it. Number 2 is, and this is kind of, maybe this is a little dumb to say, but the fact that you're in a crisis doesn't mean that you should lose your head. There are lots of decisions here that need to be made quickly, that need to be made based on reasoned business principles, that need to be made based on assessing risk. And if you're in a crisis, if you're in a panic, you can't make those decisions. You can't make those decisions well. So that's 2. Number 3 is gather the team. People who respond to a crisis are good at it because they've done it before. Most of the folks in the room probably are not in the business of responding to crisis like professionals are who handle this. You need to find those people. This is not something you do on your own. And that team always consists of a number of different people. Number 1 is legal. One of the most important things to realize is you want to keep this process privileged. You don't want to have to produce documentation in the audit that is likely to result from a significant breach. So you got to have legal involved. On top of that, lawyers are pretty good with managing project, managing vendor, communicating, keeping people on task. Some of us are pretty good at drafting public statements, stuff like that. So you get the legal. You got to have the forensic. There's going to be a couple of reasons why you got to have forensic people. Number one is you may have to figure out what went wrong. Not every breach is all that complicated to figure out what went wrong. So sometimes you need a forensic person, sometimes you don't. Almost always you need some sort of technology security expert like David's company to help you fix it. One of the first things you need to do as soon as you find out you have a vulnerability is plug the hole immediately. That's a first day activity. The last thing you want to be doing is trying to explain to people how you found out about this on Monday, but you didn't plug the hole until Thursday. And so 80,000, 100,000, or 500,000 more records were breached in those 3 days. And then business and IT. So this is a situation where your business leaders are going to need to be on the front lines explaining to the board, to key stakeholders, and so they need to be brought into the fold very, very early. So that's the first 3 items on any breach remediation. David?
And, the next step really was talking about assessing the nature and the extent of the situation. One thing that's very interesting on the slide here is talking about the difference between an incident versus a breach, right? Everybody here is thinking we're talking about breaches. Hackers come in, stole data, so on and so forth. Really, there's an incident which doesn't necessarily lead to a breach. Most companies have a security incident almost every day, okay? The person who clicks on that phishing email. I mean, come on, how many people do that, right? How many people know somebody who did that, right? Those are security incidents, and they don't necessarily result in a breach. They can, they often do, but the ability to have something in place to just address the ho-hum, run-of-the-day incident. And then you also have something that's sort of in the middle here, which technically is a data breach, but it's not, the Russians or the Chinese, the North Koreans coming in, but it's Bob in accounting, right? Bob in accounting who stuck his USB thumb drive into the computer, copied off some data, or Joe in sales, that's probably a little more common, the client list, the sales pipeline, things like that. That is a data breach. It's not the fancy, sexy data breaches that people are thinking about, but that happens a lot. There was a statistic in Verizon's 2018 report, something like 28% of data breaches are committed internally, okay? That's not true, okay? In my experience, it's like 75, okay? The discrepancy there is that most of them are not reported, most of them are not disclosed, most of them are covered under privilege. Right? And so those are the kinds of things that it's really important to understand that we're really talking about something more broad than what you see on TV. But what you do see on TV is the reason you see things on TV is because it covers a lot of people. Target, Anthem, Equifax especially. I mean, so there's a broader newsworthiness to it. There's a broader public impact. All right, and so what you really need to do when you're dealing with a data breach is sort of to quantify that, figure out how many people are actually involved, figure out what kind of data is involved. A lot of times what we get brought in as in a forensic standpoint really is to quantify that part, because the lawyers, the companies are like, do I need to go public with this? How many people do I need to tell? Are they gonna go public with this? And so that's a big concern.
And also, just to add to that, we need to figure out what state laws are in play, because we need to figure out which regulators to communicate with, whether there are federal laws in play. A lot of decisions follow out of how many people are involved and what type of information is involved and where do those people live. So number 5 is notifying the carrier. Again, if you're thinking to yourself, I don't even know if I have cyber liability insurance, that should be something that we thought about ahead of time. And just a quick note on this, there's 2 types of insurance that you need to have as a company when you do this. One is the typical cyber liability, coverage for notification of breach. By the way, your coverage needs to include all confidential information, not just legally protected information. But at any rate, breach notification, which is what commonly people think of as cyber liability. But remember, cyber liability doesn't cover crime. You lose money, you have no cyber crime coverage, you don't have insurance. So when you're thinking about insurance, you got to remember there's 2 kinds in this game. But bringing in a carrier, particularly a sophisticated carrier, is going to give you lots of resources. For instance, they may have on their panel lawyers, forensic companies, call center, email center. They may have adjusters that are particularly skilled and can help in a project management role. There may be PR people that are on panel. But there's just lots of connections. So particularly sophisticated carrier can be a resource in this. Surprisingly, I'm going to say for the insurance people in the room, you'll like hearing this. The claims agents and the carriers in this type of insurance are surprisingly responsive. You get a call back that day, that hour, they pick up their phone, they authorize the spend fairly easily. This is a really good area to deal with insurance, not always the case. Next, number 6 is you got to decide whether or not you're going to notify law enforcement. In other words, is this a theft situation, either of money or of information? Is a law enforcement authority going to care? And you got to make this decision really, yes. I see people shaking their heads. Oftentimes they just don't care. Like this is your problem. Unless there's money involved or a state actor involved or lots of information involved, they're probably not gonna care. But it's important to make this decision early on, because if law enforcement wants to be involved, there's two things that are important. One is they don't want you to screw up the evidence. So a lot of times they'll come in and take over the investigation. And not only does that mean you're not screwing up their evidence, but it also may mean that you're not paying for the forensics. Number 2 is they can buy you time. Most state data security notification laws and federal say, look, if you get instructed by law enforcement, don't tell anyone. That gives you a pass on not telling anyone. Now, sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. But they can't necessarily they might not be able to catch the thief if you were out there telling people that you caught this. All right, number 7.
So when something happens, getting a forensic expert involved, and the goal is, well, first of all, on the scene, virtually or physically, right? So we have teams that'll go and we'll do rapid deployment. But in today's day and age, with the internet and the networking, a lot of times we can get there. I can have somebody there or somebody remotely dealing with things and triaging right off the bat while we have our team en route. So there are ways to handle things remotely. And then, the kind of things we're talking about are looking at your system vulnerabilities. How could you have been compromised? Looking to see, ensuring that if you have the log files, and that's kind of an if you have the proper logging going on, that we make sure we preserve them. A good hacker on their way out is going to delete the log files. Right? That's one of the things they do right before they leave. So looking to make sure you have the log files, preserve them. They're useful for forensic analysis as well as other things down the road. And then what we're talking about doing is stopping the bleeding, right? Figuring out how to stop these guys, get them out of your network, or at least lock them down so they're not getting into certain areas of your network, right? This lateral movement, as we call it. Once you come in, you might come in through the email server, but then next thing you know, because of the access to the email server, you're getting into the accounting, you're getting into the file server, things like that. And so the ability to constrain people and lock them into certain areas of the network, if not out of the network entirely, whether that's changing passwords, or it could be segregating certain parts of the network, things like that. And then, restoring, you still have a business to run, so you have to worry about restoring systems and recovering damaged data. Again, this sounds like a big fancy thing. Maybe you're thinking backup tapes or large-scale systems and piecing things together. If we take it down to a more basic security instance or a security incident, it's the person who clicked on ransomware. Right? All your data files got encrypted. What are you going to do now? How do you get that data back? And that can be not as difficult as some of this big stuff we're talking about, right?
Particularly if you move fast.
Or it can be more difficult if your people haven't been backing things up properly. And again, going back to figuring out who has been impacted, whether it's your internal company and your internal people or your client base. If we have time, which I doubt we will, but if we happen to have time, I can give you a war story about a law school that was compromised and how we had to go through this situation here.
So the next couple of pieces relate to communication about this particular event, let's say, or incident. And communication is so important. I think part of what's difficult in my role especially is ensuring that there is kind of a destigmatizing of kind of reporting these types of things. So not only do you want to know about the event to the extent that people can tell you this, and it's not a mechanism that reporting it out, but you want to make sure that your key stakeholders are notified. So at what point do you escalate an event to your board or to banks or to shareholders? I mean, these are decisions that need to be done quickly. A lot of times, as Cam mentioned, this may be coming up in 1, 2, or 3. You may be doing your communication a little earlier. In our company, I think that's how that would work. But regardless, it's something to consider, and it's definitely a necessary step. Communicating with the data owner. So again, in our case, just to call upon the familiar, we don't own the sensitive data. We house it and use it for our business purposes, but we have certain contractual and legal obligations to provide notice to data owners, to vendors, to other parties. So it's just something to think about. It's certainly a timely notification in deciding if and when you're going to do that.
I think this is the trickiest thing, or one of the trickiest things, when you are holding data for somebody else and you've had an incident or a breach, and you got to tell them.
And how you do that.
It just, like, everything up till this point in time and how you do that and when and what you tell them, everything up until this point in time, you have control over. Soon as you start telling somebody else, you start giving up control. And when you're trying to deal with a situation, having another cook in the kitchen can create real problems. Now, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes that entity is very, very happy to let you handle it. But more often than not, it creates problems. This is the trickiest thing.
Well, and I would just add that, the timeliness factor is really, if you have an event that's affected people's data and they get notification outside of you giving them a phone call or you having your crisis management team respond, are they going to flip it to the regulator before you do? I mean, it's not a good thing, right? So it's a critical piece and it's difficult.
So we're like 2 days out now. I mean, 2 days or less have gone by. So you can imagine that to do all of this in 2 days, I mean, identify the cause of the breach, get your people together, get forensics on site, either literally or virtually, diagnose the problem. If you're doing this for the first time ever, it's going to be tough. You're going to be struggling, which is why you want an incident response plan, so you know what you're doing. It's why you want to test your incident response plan. That's kind of one of we talk about kind of first generation data security and second generation data security. That's a really key component for second generation data security, a company that not only has an incident response plan, but has tested it and worked out some of the bugs. Because to do all of this in 2 days, that's a lot. You're really moving, and it's got the wheels got to be well oiled to make it happen. All right. So next thing now we're going to kind of deal more with we're going to start telling people about this. We need to figure out what laws apply because we need to figure out who we're going to tell. And I am a big proponent to talking to the regulators early. We, particularly in New England, this is a pretty small environment. When we're talking about the Massachusetts regulators, there's 4 of them in the office. We know them all. Call them up and say, I represent so-and-so. We've had an incident or we've had a breach. We're going to be telling you about it. Ultimately, those are the people that are going to decide your fate. And you want to be talking to them early. You want to be transparent with them. You want to be getting their feedback. For instance, you're going to make a decision after you draft the initial draft of the notification. Do we send it to the regulators? If you've got lots of states involved, and I'll tell you, New York loves this. They love the early call. They love to see the draft. They will change stuff in your notification, but at least they can't complain that you got it wrong later because you showed it to them and they signed off on it. So really generating that goodwill with regulators is important, just like it is with stakeholders and the like. Transparency buys you a lot of goodwill in this type of process. In fact, I think maybe 5 years ago, general population got really angry when they heard that their information was breached. Now I think people still get angry, but it's more of a reaction of, yep, I understand that happens. People get more angry when companies are not transparent with them. In fact, I think data breach, just like any problem, is also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to communicate with your customers, communicate with your stakeholders, and, you know, you never want a breach to happen or an incident to happen, but you can turn a problem a bit into an opportunity.
If you think about, poor communication, right? If you think about some large hacks recently, whether it's Equifax or, Yahoo, right? What was one of the biggest problems that the public had? One of the problems they had was the numbers kept changing. The numbers kept going up, right? And people were just, that was a huge problem. It made the companies lose credibility in their understanding of what really happened.
So you're going to then prepare the written notification. This is essentially a press release. As soon as you send out the first document to the first person, in all likelihood, the Boston Globe's going to get it. You need to be prepared with a website statement. You need to have all of your FAQs ready to go. As soon as you send out that first notification, game on. And I'm a big fan of sending notifications by email. Again, people want to know quickly, and they're used to getting email. Yeah, you send it out in the mail, and it's going to take 3 or 4 days to get there if anybody opens their mail instead of chucking it in the garbage because they get some sort of solicitation. But I'm a big fan of email, posting it on the website. However you communicate with your clients, you should communicate in that way first and then send it in the mail.
So next, with regard to organizing a customer response team and process. So again, depending on the order in which you're taking things, there likely will be, depending on who's been affected, a notification to customers or clients or insureds in our case. And if that were to be the situation, you want to organize, train the appropriate people with the expertise to really come to the situation, rise to the occasion, and communicate effectively for the company. That may be internal. It may also be an outside communications team. And again, to Cam's point earlier, thinking about what means is the most effective way. Do you want to have more of a personal conversation by phone? Do you have a long-standing relationship with someone? Is it going to be just better received because it's by email and faster? I don't have experience with the instant message capability, but I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, you can if you communicate with customers via Facebook Messenger, it's a viable way to deliver the notice. It's not the only way you're going to deliver the notice.
Sure.
All right, 14?
14, yes, and then, of course, with that communication, you're going to be, part of this analysis is, what's happened, how many are affected, what information was implicated, and then what benefits are we going to be willing to offer? I think in consultation with Cam, coming up with a solution that would be best fitting for a scenario, whether it be credit monitoring, ongoing for a period of time, reimbursement of those expenses, obviously, again, kind of trying to build enough goodwill so that you're repairing or salvaging a relationship.
Definitely. People always ask me, don't I worry about a lawsuit out of a breach? I don't worry about a lawsuit. I worry mostly because you can usually help a person fix whatever it is that got stolen. If they got a credit card stolen, that's an easy fix. They're just going to get a new credit card. If their bank account got compromised, there may be money at issue. If their identity was compromised, you can provide them with identity monitoring and restoration. So you're going to fix the problem for them. And by the way, if you do it nicely and transparently, they're probably not going to sue you because you solved their problem. That's not always true. There are big breaches with big companies and they're going to get sued. But I don't worry about the lawsuit. I worry about the regulator. Which is why, again, you fix the problem with the individual, you're transparent with the regulator. I knock on wood, I still haven't had a breach result in a lawsuit. So that number 14, how you deal with your people, goes a long way to avoiding problems down the road. All right, so you're going to finalize the written materials, send them out. That's go day. Your team is going to be online, ready to go. The first 3 days to 7 days, you're going to get 90% of your calls, unless we're talking about a breach of like millions of people, then it's going to go on longer. But for a breach of, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, or 100,000 records, most of your calls are going to come in the first 7 days, which is, again, why you may want to be hiring a third party, because they have lots of people to answer phones, they're good at it, all that sort of stuff. And then you're going to deliver the notices. There's going to be an onslaught of calls that you want to manage. Oftentimes, the mantra, this is a PR mantra, you stay on message, but a lot of times you modify message, particularly as you're hearing about people's concerns that you never knew about, or you're hearing from people that you didn't expect to hear about. So you do stay on message, but a lot of times you have to modify the message as well.
And then, and with that in mind, the recommunication, the circling back with key stakeholders and regulators, again, I'm a big fan of kind of closing the loop, coming back either to conclude an event or to just provide an update. It goes a long way, shows responsiveness and transparency, and again, you're keeping people in the loop. You're letting them know what's happening with the situation, with their information, to the extent that you can give them any detail.
And then the last thing is just loose ends. There's always loose ends that come up, and I'll give you a few. David will understand. He's like, when you go through, like, in a forensic process, you're looking for why the breach happened, you always find more vulnerabilities. Always. I'll find the one that caused the breach, and we'll find 5 more. So you got to follow up on that loose end. You got to plug those vulnerabilities. You may decide, look, we want to be proactive because we know we're going to get audited. We're going to do a full risk reassessment as a result of this, so that when the auditors come in, we can say, we did a full risk reassessment. We found these vulnerabilities in addition to the one that caused the breach. We fixed them, see how good we are. Don't whack us, we're good people.
So let me, a little war story, right? The vulnerabilities, things like that. I had a compromise. It was a money wire transfer service, fairly well-known one, okay? And over the holiday weekend, which is when all this stuff always happens, right? When they get an extra day lead time there. Over the holiday weekend, they were compromised. It turns out the best way to make money isn't printing it with plates and stuff like that. It's to insert a row into a database that says, here's a person, name and address, who is owed $50,000, right? It's a money wire. That's all it is. So anyway, they had about 8 wires. They lost about $60,000. No clients were impacted, right? It was just their money that was out there. And we went down to do the assessment, try to figure out where the compromise came from. And after the first 6 or 8 hours, day or so on site, I told them, I said, look, you got about 50 different ways this could have happened, okay? We can sit down and try to track them all down, try to track down the one for you and, spend $100,000, $200,000, whatever it is. But you only got hit 60, none of your clients are impacted this time. How about you spend some time just to plug all the other holes so that you don't get a worse one? Just that's a hit, right? Take the hit, spend the money elsewhere, right?
All right, so those are the top 20. Let's pause here and give all of you in the audience time to ask us questions, talk about concerns. There's some, go ahead.
Yeah, I have seen, it used to be the kids in Sweden who between 2 o'clock after school and 5 o'clock before mom came home, that they were playing with programs and they were figuring out ways to get into systems, and whether it was started with defacing your website, and then it became, hey, let me see what I can do. It's organized crime now, right? It is organized crime. 5 years ago, 8 years ago, when I started telling people it's organized crime, they didn't get it, right? And what I was saying, look,
No.
it's a Russian oligarch or anything like that,
Tony
right?
Soprano isn't smart enough to do this. People are from Czechoslovakia who do this.
So the way it's organized crime is you get the techies, you get those same kids, right, who were able to come in and says, they're the ones who are able to compromise and get the money or get access, right? And then and they're out there scanning networks all day long, right? And it's tiered. You get the junior guys who are scanning networks, you find holes. The mid-level guys are sort of poking around. Where are these holes from? What companies are they in? Are they worth spending the effort? And then you get the senior level, higher tech guys who are like, okay, here's a bank that we got into. Let me focus on that, all right? And then, when I say it's organized crime, give you an example, right? It's from Tony Soprano. I remember watching this. They take the money and they can't take cash because it's too big. So what they do, it's the equivalent. They take cash and they convert it into Home Depot gift cards or gift cards in general. Home Depot. That's why you have to give them your ID now, because to use the credit because of exactly this. So they would
That's
end up.
why there's a lot of identity theft now, because they need fake IDs to
Yep.
get the cash cards, to get the money out.
Yep. So, but we take it to the organized crime piece that you guys can get is, so now you have all these Home Depot credit cards. Some kid or some small group has, 10,000 Home Depot credit cards with $500 each. What are they gonna do with it? They don't even have a house, right? They don't have a Home Depot near them. What they do is they get it down to the organized crime, to the people who are on the streets. And these are guys who are on the streets in New York say, hey, you want a Home Depot credit card? $300 gets you $500. Right? And that's how they monetize it. So that's how it's organized crime, right? It's a whole tier, a whole group of people, not just techies, but guys on the street.
Most money gets stolen by European and Eastern European. Most information gets stolen by nation-state actors in Asia, East Asia, that type of stuff. But David's 100% more. 100%. This is organized crime. This is organized, multi-tiered, well-financed, smart. Smarter than any of us.
That's how it goes. My example is exactly how it works.
Green dot, yeah. Online banks. Other questions? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so having Bitcoin on hand, well, okay, so how many guys got the emails that's making around these days, right? It tends to be guys who are getting it, right? It says, I'm a hacker and I got your credentials, and they give you a username and a password. Like, wow, that's a real one. I haven't used it in a while, but that's a real one. They must really be in my system, and they say, I hacked your system, I activated your video camera, and I tracked what websites you were going to, and boy, you don't want me telling your wife or anybody else about that, so give me 50 Bitcoin. Right? And that's a scam. It's not really happening, right? But they want the Bitcoin, and I've had clients, pretty well-to-do, lawyers and people who are very worried about their reputation, legislators, and like, how do I get Bitcoin? They say they need it within 24 hours or they're gonna release the data. How do I get the coin? And we say, look, we have some coin, right? We got coin. If you really wanna do it, we'll be the coin exchange, and we'll just do this. But in this case, I always tell them, that's BS. It's a scam. You don't have to pay anything.
Yeah, so there's lots of defenses to ransomware before it ever hits your system, which we'll talk.
I don't have to know what they're looking at. I can guess.
Well, the scary part of that is they're actually activating the webcam, videoing whatever the person is doing that's watching the porn, which is really disgusting. But at any rate, and people pay for that. Yeah, they'll pay to keep that video off the internet. Any rate, there's lots of defenses to ransomware before you ever get there, but. And the last line of defense is have a good backup system, because as long as you can restore from backup, you shouldn't have to pay for ransomware. But sometimes, right? Or the backup system gets encrypted, gets hit because. So this is going to perhaps be surprising to some of you, but ransomware attackers are very accommodating. You log on to the dark web, you talk to them. How much time do you need? Can we help you get the Bitcoin? They're very accommodating. And, we've gone through cycles. At the beginning, ransomware attackers almost always release the data. In the middle, they don't. Now, you pretty much get your data back if you have to pay. And you can get Bitcoin pretty quickly. And they're very accommodating to help you. In fact, many of them will tell you, well, for an additional Bitcoin or two, we'll tell you how they hacked your system. And some of them even have the audacity to tell you they'll help you fix it.
And real quick, just another tip.
Yes, they're in business. It's just illegal, but they're in business.
The email that I was talking about, where they give you a username and password, you're like, wow, this is true. They must have really hacked my system. The way they got it, the way they associated you, is because your accounts were compromised, whether it was LinkedIn or Yahoo or whatever, and that's on the darknet. Okay, so tip for you guys: there's a website called Have I Been Pwned, with a P, not an O. Okay, have I been pwned? If you go there, you put in your email address, they will tell you which accounts your email address has been compromised in. Whether it's Experian, LinkedIn, Yahoo, so on and so forth. They're not gonna have all of them because they're still floating around the dark net, okay? But these guys gather some stuff, and you can at least say, oh, here's where I got risk. Wow, it's been 8 years and I haven't changed the password for this account. Maybe I should do that now. Have I been pwned, POWNED.com. PW, okay, sorry. Yeah, not the O, but the P. Yes, have I been pwned? What if, well, the data they have is already out there. All they're doing is aggregate what's on the dark web, right? So there's nothing new there for them.
All right.
They could do that. They could do that.
They just gonna buy someone's, they're gonna buy, I mean, they're gonna buy, if they really wanna attack somebody, they're just gonna buy that person's identity for whatever it is. Price is usually dependent on your credit score, and your age. Yes? Vladimir Putin already has your data. Yeah, there you go. So what do you do to stop that from happening? Oh, that's good. That's what we're going to talk about in the next part of the presentation. Okay, so let's talk about that. We can always come back, and at the end, we've got a slide that talks a lot about particular risk factors and stuff. So, look, the idea of information security is do the best you can to prevent it from happening in the first place. And all of the stuff we're talking about, whether it's phishing or lack of encryption on device, there are fixes for it. The way you identify where your holes are and fix them is the process we're going to talk about now. It's going to be how do we keep Bob from stealing our stuff? How do we prevent that spreadsheet from being emailed out, which, by the way, is an email scan program that looks for Social Security numbers. But more to the point, data security is not about figuring out what the 10 biggest threats are. I mean, yes, we have the 10 biggest threats on the last slide, but it's not about that because every company might have those 10 threats. One company might have 7, another company 8. But the point is there's lots of areas where you could be vulnerable, and you need to find out about where it is that your particular company is vulnerable, how vulnerable you are, what data you have that's particularly at risk, how much money you particularly have to plug risks, stuff like that, is very company specific, very entity specific. But this is the process. First of all, you do a risk assessment. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means because that's where the rubber hits the road. But this is something, and I want to give you a sense as to how long these things take, and you probably can also tabulate how much cost these things are based on how much time they take, because it's usually professional time. So for most small companies, it's a 1 to 2 day process. Medium companies, it's 5, 6, 7 day process at the most. By medium, I'm talking about like 500 or less employees. When you get into large companies of 1,000, 2,000, multiple places, now you're talking about a process that it's gonna go out over more time. But I mean, if you're a small to medium-sized company, think I can do this in days, not weeks. That's the risk assessment. Number one, I'm gonna find out where my holes are. Number 2 is remediation. I gotta plug this. That's something that spreads out over a lot more time. You're gonna find things that you don't have the money to pay for, that you don't have solutions to pay for, that are cultural issues that are gonna take longer to change. We always look at a remediation cycle in years, months, years, not days, weeks. And that's really, I can tell you how much pretty much the risk assessment's gonna cost. I can tell you how much the policy's gonna cost. I can tell you how much the training's gonna cost. I cannot tell you what the remediation's gonna cost because I don't know what the remediation is. What I do know is there's lots of solutions for any one problem, and a company can deal with it without having to spend, themselves into bankruptcy.
Well, what I will also say is for risk assessment, I tend to feel the 80-20 rule applies. Okay, so 20% of the time we can find out 80% of what you have wrong. Okay, the other 20% is the much more detailed stuff, pen testing, things like that. That's going to get you the 80% of the effort is going to get you the remaining 20. So in a day or so, right, for a small, medium enterprise, we can get you, 80% of the way there, and you already have a long list that's going to take you the year or so to fix, right, and then we can come back and do the rest.
And I'll follow up on that 80-20 piece. You can probably solve 80% or remediate 80% of your problems with 20% of your costs. Particularly if this is the first time you're doing it, the low-hanging fruit is stuff that can be accomplished fairly readily for fairly short dollars. So you're going to do the assessment, mitigate, policy. Again, that's a short order type of thing. Training and training. This is all I'll say kind of about training, which is, other than the risk assessment, is the most important thing you can do. Employees are our biggest vulnerability. Phishing is all about an employee doing something silly. I mean, yes, we can have IT backup, but almost all of our biggest vulnerabilities about training, about employees. And the only way we're going to change that risk, one of the only ways we're really going to change that risk is teach people.
So the vast majority of data breach, when I'm talking about the external data breach, nation, state, or just external, the vast majority, and I'm going to make up a number, but something like the 80-90% range, right, are being compromised these days through phishing. Right? It's too much effort to come in and hack a firewall or whatever. And there's enough technology out there that's pretty good. There's not enough technology to teach people not to click on that really enticing link. When we do phishing exercises, we did an assessment one time. It was a federal-based assessment for a cloud service provider, and we told them, as part of what we need to do is a phishing test. And we told them we're going to do the phishing test, between the dates of this and that, right? And it was a 25-person enterprise. Not that many people. Two clicked on it. I mean, we can't broadcast it anymore. And 2 out of 25, almost 10%, right, of the people clicked on it. And it's not just, you think it's the low-level person who maybe doesn't have access to a whole lot of data. Can't do a whole. 60% of it, 80% of it, it's the executives. I had another story where it was a foundation. So somebody the accountant person got an email, says, wow, this looks suspicious. Went to the president, said, what do you think? Is this phishing? The president said, yeah, it looks good, go ahead and click on it. I mean, I'm not kidding. That's what happened. This person did the right thing. Wasn't sure, asked somebody who thought they ought to know. That person to know did not know. Right? And so to lead into the actual problem is usually the executives are the ones who feel like, well, I should not be locked out of anything. I own this company, I run this company, why am I not? This is why. Need to know. You don't need to know that information. And when you click on that link that says, I have a proposal for you, please review this big invoice or contract for work, it's just too enticing. I might lose money if I don't click on this, right? That's what the executives are thinking. And that's how this works.
So oftentimes they're not thinking. They're on a handheld in an airport. You're talking about for filtering phishing. So I'll give you a kind of the modern cutting edge on that is you can't filter just by words. You get too many false positives. What you do is you put algorithms in place that look for mismatches on the email address and the name that. So we all get, if you may be getting an email from Cameron G. Shilling, and that's what you see in your header. But that if you look below, the email address is not Cameron.Shilling. So they look for mismatches and then words. But you can't just do a word algorithm.
Another example of an easy mismatch, it seems obvious once you think about it, is you have an email server, SunBlock systems, we have our email server. If some other email server is connecting to us, sending emails from SunBlock systems, well, that doesn't make any sense. Right? So it's going to know, hey, that you are not supposed to be doing that. And there's other technologies out there. The internet's open, right? And that's one of the problems or one of the weaknesses that cause all this. But there's technology out there that talks about, hey, is this a valid email server that should be sending for these domains? That's all, unfortunately, optional adoption. Right, and that's part of the problem.
There's a better way, actually, to ferret out that type of issue, and that is by virtue of sandboxing emails with links and attachments that come in. So instead of trying to block it on the way in, you put a marker on it, and so if somebody clicks on the attachment or the link, it takes them to a sandbox. Where it tests it, and so that's kind of a technology backup. In fact, let's get to the last slide. Let me just say the last thing I want to say about risk, about this whole process. I'm going to skip over the risk assessment slides. Anybody who wants to talk about it, we can talk after. But data security is not. There's no end point. This is not something you ever finish. True data security is a process, and when you get through it the first time, you go back and you do it again. And you do it again, and you do it again until it becomes an ingrained part of your business. Just like human resources, just like your accounting department, data security has to become a business function of the company. And that is really the only way where a business can generate that culture of security necessary to have a chance in the world we're in. All right, so let's go to the last slide, because this is the fun stuff. This is what everybody wants to talk about anyway. So these are your biggest threats, your biggest security risks. David, take it away.
So let's see here. Robust password protocols. Well, that doesn't mean, password of my dog is Susie, exclamation point, star, blah, 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 right? I mean, that's part of it, and I can show you graphs and statistics about for each extra character you add onto your password, here's the complexity and the time to brute force it, which means to randomly guess it, right? So that helps. But really what's happening these days is you have the multi-factor authentication. You guys go to your bank, you log into your username, password, and then the bank will text you another digit code, right? That's multi-factor or two-factor means you have to do two things, right? There's actually, 3 factors you can have out there, but one is what you know, username, password. The other is what you have, your cell phone or a token or whatever. And then the third one that nobody likes is what you are, which is biometrics. But you see the fingerprint things out there these days, right? So more than one factor, right? And the multi-factor works, your cell phone works pretty well, not foolproof, pretty well, because everybody has one, it's easy to use, and the point is people, like hackers can transmit over the internet a username and password, but they can't transmit over the internet your phone, right? It's a physical device. Not foolproof, people. I have seen multi-factor authentication be compromised also.
What I will say before we get to point number 2 is there's now applications that will work on an operating system to create multi-factor when the first time you step into the system, and they can be applied to all the cloud accounts. That's one big problem we have. Employees, in addition to logging onto our system, they log onto 30 cloud accounts. And those cloud accounts sometimes have multi-factor, sometimes don't. Oftentimes, we don't necessarily control the password as well as we should at the corporate level. So there's now these applications that you can put in place, single sign-on, multi-factor, for not just the operating system, but the clouds as well.
Next piece is again, we're talking corporations here. Next piece is encryption of laptops and cell phones, right? I mean, laptops, it used to be you had desktops and if you were lucky, you had a laptop. Everybody's got laptops these days. And people leave them in their cars to get broken into. They leave them on the train, they leave them on the airplane, so on and so forth. Encryption, have that stuff encrypted, and Windows has made it very easy now with BitLocker. It's basically seamless encryption. So there's really no reason out there not to have encryption on your laptops. Cell phones, iPhones are nice because they are natively encrypted. And then MDM, which is mobile device management, as a company, right? Most companies allow you to BYOD, bring your own device, right? They don't want to pay for a cell phone and cell plan anymore. So that means they allow you to connect your personal cell phone to their email, to their computer system, so you can get corporate email. Well, phone gets lost, guy leaves, how do you make sure that that data is not staying out on there? So you have mobile device management that helps to sandbox the data. What you can then do is when they leave, you can destroy the sandbox, right, which destroys all the data that's within it. Some of these mobile MDM applications are good enough that you can't even cut and paste from within the sandbox to outside the sandbox, those types of controls. That's kind of MDM I like, right? What you'll hear a lot about those MDM, mobile device management, where they're really just focusing on like knowing where the cell phone is, GPS, knowing if it's been updated or not for patching, knowing what applications are running on it. Those are all good, but it's not really giving you enough control. I like the kind that give you sandbox where you can go out and reach. You can restrict your data to be within a certain place, and you can go out and reach and just destroy that one area. I won't touch your phone. I won't touch your photos. I won't touch any of those things. That's part of the control problems. I mean, it's the same question about USB drives. Any USB type of attachment device. Yeah.
So I'll give you the tiered. Number 1, disable the USB ports. Number 2, endpoint security, antivirus, anti-malware on laptops. Number 3, don't let users be administrators of their local devices, because most malware, not all, is an executable file, so a non-administrator can't download it. And lastly, there's something called network access control, NAC, so you can actually, so only devices can access the network that have, that you authorize. It's a whitelist. So there's a tiered system of reducing that risk. Would you go to number 4, just so we get through the list.
Secure portals, exchange email of information. I mean, number 3 and 4 can be related. Some of you guys have gotten emails from your financial institutions or your healthcare institutions that you get an email. The email isn't the message, right? The email is saying, hey, you have an email. Right? And you have to click on the link, which then takes you to a website where it is now secure. So the email is just notifying, and then you have to go to that secure portal, okay, and in order to actually get the information. The reason you need to do that is because when you send an email from one server to another, there's no encryption there. All right? That just doesn't, it can happen, but it 99.9% doesn't happen, okay? So all they're doing is saying, hey, I got a Dropbox, take a look what it is, and then that Dropbox has that level of encryption. So you can extend that idea to other portals where you can use to exchange information securely.
Why don't we do 2 more and then open it up to questions? David, you want to cover 7, and then Meg, maybe you go to 10?
Sure.
So continuous activity-based monitoring remediation inside the firewall. So I talked about lateral movement, right? Which is you compromise one box, and then from there you get to the other boxes. That is what happens. And that one box you compromise is probably a desktop from phishing, right? Again, we're not coming in through the front door anymore, going through that one firewall. You've gotten in, the Trojan horse, you've gotten in, now you're wreaking havoc from within. So what you need to do is you need to worry about the lateral movement, and there's different ways of doing that. But one of it is monitoring what's going on, monitoring what's going across your network, monitoring what's in your network. And it's kind of like malware, but much more sophisticated because it's not looking at just a program when you want to execute or scan, on a nightly basis. It's continuously scanning. When you execute something, it's automatically going to check. It's going to look what's in your memory to see what's in RAM, the programs that are in RAM, because you can have a program that runs something innocuous, but what it's really doing is pulling something that goes into RAM. There's even more sophisticated algorithms out there and products out there that are behavioral-based, behavioral analytics. So again, an example is Joe in accounting logs in Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Right? Pretty religious because they're an accountant. That's what you do, right? So 9 to 5, pretty religious. And all of a sudden, one night, Saturday at 2 a.m., Joe logs into his computer. Well, it's probably not Joe, right? Or Joe logs in every day from, Massachusetts, Boston area, and Joe logged in from Russia. Probably not Joe, okay? So you take these behavioral, behavior patterns and you look for the aberrations.
And I'll say, this is where the curve is on data security. For network infrastructure security, we really need to be looking towards activity-based monitoring. This will catch your employee downloading documents that he or she shouldn't download. There's activity-based monitoring that's automated. You can have third parties that are coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning, shutting down the activity, even though nobody at the company is awake. This is where we need to be as far as network infrastructure security.
I'll give you another example of a fun one, right? There's software out there that you mentioned shutting people down, right? Well, maybe it's a false positive. Maybe Joe really has a deadline, right? And needs to come in. And I came in at 2 a.m. on a Saturday, and this system shuts me out. I just wasted that whole effort, right? And Joe's not going to be happy. So there's software out there that will do what's called confirmation. All right. So when they see something when they think they have a box that's been compromised, they're going to go and insert. The software is going to go insert onto the desktop a file called passwords.txt. Right? It's going to take a passwords.txt, password.xls, and then it's going to monitor, and this is all fake logins, right? But it's going to monitor the rest of the network to say, hey, has anybody tried to use that fake login? If the answer is yes, then you've got confirmation of a problem. Right? So those are the kinds of sophisticated processes that are out there nowadays.
And then the last thing we want to cover is vendor management, because this is a critical area as well.
So due diligence and vendor risk management, and I would add to what's already been said on this list, many of these things that you're seeing are certainly steps to reduce risk, but they're also being built into regulations that are now being implemented. So states and more globally, you're starting to see this call for security enhancements as a legal requirement. So with that in mind, then vendor risk management, knowing who you're working with, having the proper agreements in place are really critical to this. And quite frankly, at this point, now it's being built into, before someone's willing to work with us or work with another, let's say us working with a vendor, we're requiring a demonstration of security sophistication, just as a matter of course. So this is definitely changing, certainly very important just on its face, but now a requirement as well.
Yeah. And we spend a lot of time doing due diligence with, on key vendors and getting key vendors to enter into data security agreements. That, again, that's a process, after you do a risk assessment, that can take years. Because vendors don't want to talk to you about signing a data security agreement until you have to sign a new services agreement.
Well, and a lot of long-standing relationships that you have aren't capable of doing that. So it's again weighing what it may now be a legal requirement with what, has been a bread and butter of your business.
So I'll give you one more example. Sorry, war stories are kind of my thing. Just it provides some background. We were doing a HIPAA assessment for a medical device manufacturer, and they use a pretty common electronic medical records system, right? And we got on it. They're a vendor, right? It's a cloud-based system. They're a vendor. And we said, okay, well, let's look at the system. And I looked at it. I can tell the interface had been written circa 1997, maybe, right? You can look in the field, you can tell about it. And then we just got on it, looked around, and I saw some major problems. I'm like I could see other companies' systems and data, right? There's no segregation between our client and other of their clients. So what we said was, vendor management, hey, we're a vendor. We'd like to see your latest security review, your latest security assessment, show us some of your documents, your policies. They said, okay, well, we'll get back to you on that. And about a day and a half later, they gave us a 3-page document that I think I could have Googled and found, right? And that was what they had.
All right, so we are what stands in between you and lunch. However, who's brave enough to raise their hand? Questions? Hit us with your hardest questions. Yes? So it totally depends on what you mean by a single tenant versus a multi-tenant. Nowadays, almost all cloud vendors, so if you have your own servers in some sort of storage facility, they're gonna be your servers, they're gonna be physically secured, your stuff is gonna be separate from other people's stuff, you're gonna have control over the physical space. If you're talking about true clouds, you're not really gonna ever know whether your stuff is, how it's segregated. Particularly if you're using a big cloud service like AWS or something like that. But by and large, my feeling is that those types of large cloud vendors are significantly more secure than we as small and medium-sized businesses can make our own server farms. There are always exceptions to that rule, but I'm not afraid to go in the cloud as long as we know who the cloud provider is and what their level of security is. Yes?
Here's my recommendation.
Give them prizes,
Well,
Incentivize.
candy,
Better,
wine.
better. Along those lines, okay, what I tell my clients is security training,
Yeah.
annual security training as part of their annual review. If they don't do it, they don't get their raise.
Do you have thoughts
Well,
on it?
I mean, I think incentivizing certainly
Better than candy.
more in the positive, right? So we also, from my perspective, again with that destigmatizing of compliance, right? Like I want to ensure that I'm not coming in and penalizing, right? That's just not how we've operated. But I think that coupling in person with online frequent trainings and incentivizing through something that your employees like to enjoy, that's worked somewhat well for us.
So there's a couple, I will add a little bit to my initial glib, give them free stuff. Which I wasn't kidding. So there's a couple of things. Number one is talk to them about it. Like people who care, when you talk to them in ways that they can understand, they'll care about it. Particularly like you can talk to them about their own personal security and they start caring really quick. Like, talk to them about how to freeze their credit file or how to get identity monitoring assurance or how to use a single sign-on for their own accounts. Talk to them about it and you'll get a group that cares. Number two is make it cool for them. Give them fun toys. Employees love single sign-on multi-factor authentication because they don't have to remember a bunch of passwords anymore. So don't make it harder, make it easier, funner. And then the last thing I read about, just keep going at it, just keep going at it and at it and at it and at it. Great question. Who's got another good one?
systems and their sophistication that, do you have any suggestions?
Maybe you want to take a swing at this one first?
So we're talking about your clients that are not communicating safely with you, or just that you see they're not doing, communicating, practicing best, implementing best practices?
Well, my initial question is not, for example, if I want to send somebody documents, via a secure data transfer, platform, and they can't, they don't know how to get it, either because they just aren't very sophisticated, or, and then they say, well, put it on the thumb drive instead of, which, by the way, is the other thing.
Well, you can encrypt that, right?
Exactly, but, it just makes it very difficult. I encrypt it and I send it to somebody, they don't know how to unencrypt it. So it seems to be a major impediment to some client relationships, and so that's one consideration. Then the other piece is, because of those difficulties, it's sort of like the product manufacturer who puts on a safety device that doesn't take into account the mass reviews that people remove it. Do you have any suggestions?
Risk mitigation, right? I mean, security, convenience, there's that end of the spectrum. I'll give you my glib answer, which is if they can't figure out how to click on a link on an email from you that you've warned them about, then I don't know, get them off a computer. I'm sure Cam's got a
I
better
think you can
answer.
solve some of these issues with portals. I agree with David in a sense. If a client can't enter a password, you're stuck. But there are lots of document management systems where you can send the client from inside your document management system a link to a document, and they click on the link, and they can have one password that they get everything from your firm using. So I move towards that portal environment. I understand people don't like encrypted email, mostly because it doesn't operate well with their system. But portals are great. Portals also gives you lots of logging functionality that you don't have with like encrypted email. And what you really want to do, you want to like be looking at this in a document management system role. So if you have an existing document management system, start asking them, do you have a portal functionality? When's that coming out in the next version? If you don't have it, why don't you have it?
And when you tell them that I'm going to send you a document, click on the link, warn them ahead of time so they know it's only the one from you that they should be clicking on, right?
Thank you.
Other questions? Or are we really hungry?
We're on time even.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. You guys have been a great audience.